Perfect. Let's begin this meeting. Welcome everybody, and we're ready to start.
Perfect. I'm going to have Mr. Durs introduce our first guest.
So today we're giving you an update on the facilities master plan, and I've got a few people here behind me to help me with that because they're the experts and just pulling me along for the ride. We've got Tracy Richter from HBM Leadership. We've got Mark Reddish from Aranesco and Brian Jewett from Aranesco with us. And they'll be going through the presentation. So this is where you guys take up.
And before we go, well, thank you, Peter. Appreciate it. Well, good evening, board. It's a pleasure to see you tonight. There's been a lot of work done so far, and I know you're excited to see some of this preliminary stuff. This first board meeting, I always like to say that, there's probably 715 steps in a master plan. We're probably on step 12. So there's still a lot to do, and there's still a lot of transparency and community stuff to get out there. But tonight's going to give you kind of just an update on process and a little snippet of the data, so you can see kind of what's going on. Tomorrow we have our first meeting with the facilities committee. We're super excited about that because we're going to do a deeper dive into the educational adequacy assessment and to the condition assessment with that group. And so we'll get started going good. So let me start off with kind of the process and why we do master planning. I think this is really, really important. This little stool I've been using for a really long time, as you can see, it's got clip art, but it's a stool that really makes a lot of sense when you think about good school facilities planning. I've always believed that if you don't pay attention to one leg of the stool, it's like every bad restaurant chair you've ever sat in. It will wobble and your facilities will never be stable. And so you really have to pay attention to these 4 stools. I'll go through them just very quickly. The enrollment demographics, always important to know how many and who you're serving. That's a really important component to this. The condition is not just the physical condition, but the educational adequacy, which we're going to talk about tonight, and how these kind of get put together to make sure that you're trying to be more proactive in a maintenance and capital improvement. And I know that's hard for everybody. And I tell everybody there's no spoiler alert. There's no district in the country can afford all their needs. So don't feel bad that you can't. And it's always a good starting point. At some point doing good master planning and just starting to catch up again. And so we're always looking at that. The educational framework, which I believe is a cornerstone. Educational framework is really about your programs, your curriculum, everything from the size of your schools to the curriculums you serve to the programs you have. That really goes into consideration when you're doing a facilities plan. And it actually should be the foundation of how you do planning. I believe this as a former educator myself, and I've been doing planning for almost 25 years now, that I think facilities have very little to do with facilities planning. I think it's about education. I think it's about the model of education that you put into these buildings. And that's how buildings should be formed, by the function. And so good planning will do that. And finally, that fourth leg and nobody really wants to talk about is cost and funding, but that's important too. And once again, it's just a matter of how you get funded and when you get funded and how much you can fund. And so good facilities planning is really more about prioritization than it is about solving everything. And so when you go through that, we always talk about it being very structured and efficient. So you want to do good planning, but planning efficiency and planning means it's your standard operations procedures. It's what you always do. Planning shouldn't be an event. We should always be doing it in a continuous cycle. And this district has done that. And we've been at this for a while, going back a few years, even pre-pandemic when this all started. And so the wheels are in motion to make this part of the standard operations procedure of NAMBA. When I talk about iterative, means iterative meaning that it builds on and that it keeps building on each other. And so you start with good data, you start with community input, you get that educational framework put together, and everything just kind of goes on top of each other. But it all is linked together. And you can't do good planning without paying attention to all of it. And that's what I really believe that. I think the districts get into this because maybe they've got growth or shrinking enrollment. So we say we're going to do a facilities plan. Okay, well, what about condition? Well, some people just say it's about condition, but it's not. And so you guys you're approaching this in the right way, and sometimes not the easy way, because I think when you go in this, sometimes tough decisions have to get made in a good facilities plan. Whether it's a priority of buildings, whether it's what happens when something happens to a building, what do you have to do after that? And so there's some tough decisions down the road, but you'll be prepared for them. Part of our goal is to get all this information together. We want to make sure we balance this with your community values. Certainly we have all done work in Idaho across the state, but we work nationally too. But what we've come to understand is that, no district's alike. And it's your community values that really kind of shape what a facility plan can look like. But I think this is really important to mention at this point is that when you're doing facility planning, it's about good data management and community input. And so I get asked all the time, do we have a data-driven plan? And I say, well, I don't even know what that means anymore, because the community is a piece of data that you need to include into your decision-making, certainly. But sometimes when you let the data control everything, you can forget about the community values. But sometimes when you let all the community values drive it, you can forget some of the data. And so good planning really knows how to balance it. And that's actually the differentiator in every plan I've ever done, is what takes the driver's seat and what takes the back seat. And sometimes they do both during the planning process. We certainly want to live within our financial means, whatever that means to you down the road. And how much and when you spend is going to be up to you. Again, you can't get it all done. Nobody can. So let's make it a good plan that really aligns, those values up front. And it also has to align to your strategic plan. If we're not aligned to that strategic plan that you have, then don't do planning. Just don't. Because it all has to tie together. You have to meet your goals through good facilities plan. They can support every one of your strategic goals if you let them. And certainly it's tailored to you. We do this everywhere, but it is tailored to you. One of the first things you're going to see is a state of the schools report. And this is one of the things we're going to go through tomorrow. A state of schools report is just a planning information document. It is the centerpiece of data that everybody starts from. And so once we get it kind of in good final form, and it won't be final, a state of the schools is never final, just so you know that, because the state of the schools is always turning. We're going to give you an update on enrollment demographics. We're going to look at all that condition assessment, look at the educational profile, the financial profile, and certainly board and legislative policies that impact planning, because those will come into play too as we go forward. So looking at the enrollment and demographics is kind of an interesting chart to see, because the enrollment has been a little quirky in the last year and a half. Everybody's been through it. So, but one of the things I try to do is I try to highlight kind of the reds of your peak enrollment and the greens where it starts to cool down a little bit. And oftentimes I pay attention more to that kindergarten, first grade enrollment to kind of see where you're going to go. We all know that birth rates dropped post-recession, and so from 2012 to 2017, 18, we really saw kind of an echo bust in birth data. And so now you have another influence that's going to be people moving in and populations moving in. But what does that mean to gentrification of children and how many more children are going to be coming in? And in Idaho, where kindergarten's not exactly which you don't have to go to kindergarten here yet, but I'm sure that'll come down the road someday. But you still do see a lot of kindergartners come in. But so I track that first grade enrollment, but you can see even from about 8 or 9 years ago that there's about 150 less students coming into kindergarten. And so when that kind of tracks through, you can kind of see your bubble as it starts to move through. And so you see that, those big classes of 13, 14 that came in, which was a result of that 2007, 2008, kind of echo boom in birth rates across the country. So there's a direct relationship there. And again, you have noticed significant growth in population, but that's not correlating to school-age children necessarily. And so we're going to just pay close attention to that. But understanding that there's room, and there's always going to be room. We're not in a press need, and in some areas we may get more press than others. But again, there's where facilities planning isn't just about facilities. It's about balancing utilization. How can you do that? Do you do it through other feeder patterns? Do you do it through additions to schools? Do you do it through boundary changes? There's all kinds of solutions to how you can do this. And some of those are just awful words to say and awful words to hear. But there's really good processes to go through that, and understanding that change is inevitable. And so as you change as a district and as you grow and you shrink in other areas, your district has to kind of evolve with it. And so we'll give the good facts on how to make those good decisions. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn it over to Mark, and he's going to spend about 5 or 6 slides on your condition, on your actual physical condition. I'm going to come back up here and I'm going to talk a little bit about the educational adequacy. Mark, may I have it?
Thank you. Good evening. I'm happy to be here. Thank you for having me. We'll just go through some of the, we did a condition assessment for you, and I just want to give you some of the preliminaries so you can have some to digest. So just kind of get level set, you can see as a portfolio, you have 46 buildings. Gross area, square footage is about 2.37 million square feet. Average age 41 years. And the CRV, the current replacement value, is at 682 million. So that CRV is to say, if everything gets wiped out, then you have to rebuild it like for like, no improvements. $682 million. It's an important number for some of the metrics that we have coming up as we start to understand how much deferral you have and what percentage of your overall value is in deferral. So just kind of bear some of those numbers in mind. $682 million for CRVs. Ours was a life cycle analysis exercise. So not only do we understand the condition, but we tried to put every building element be established where it's at on its life cycle. So if you go to a manufacturer for that light system, the manufacturer is going to say this light will last 17 and a half years. And part of our job was to say, is it expired or how much time does it have left? And when it does expire 2, 3, 5 years from now, how much will it cost to replace it? Okay. So in this chart here, everything to the left is all the items that have expired. That's your deferred maintenance. The only other things that might be in there are things that have completely failed, which there's not as much. But those are all things whose life cycles have expired. And from a capital planning exercise, you know that those are on the docket. All right. And then this is a 30-year view. There's a software program behind this called Asset Planner that you have a subscription to. So you can slice and dice this data. We're going to do a lot of that tomorrow. We can look at it from a 5 or a 10 or a 20. Again, this is a 30-year view. So you can see that first year is deferred maintenance, and those years forward are based on when the life cycles of those different elements are scheduled to expire. All right. So does that just say that they will? No, but it gives you an idea for capital planning purposes, how much money you're going to need into the future. So interestingly, you have $116.5 million in deferred maintenance. And one of the other exercises that we undertook was, is Peter and I looked at the last 10 years of your capital allocation and came up with an annual average. It was about $1.2 million. I think in the last couple of years you've had higher amounts, but on a 10-year average, it's been 1.2. And I just tried to overlay that against the bottom to illustrate how effective or not that capital allocation is. You know, that's why you have deferred maintenance, right? And Tracy made this point earlier. Every school district in America is like this. Okay. So in addition to saying what's outside of life cycle, we also had our assessment team go and assign some priority. So that current building element that they were assessing, was there a code violation? Did it represent, you know, a safety risk? Could it shut the building down if it was replaced? Were there operational or energy savings? And if the answer to any of those questions is yes, a weight is placed on that element. 2 yeses, heavier the weight, 3 yeses, heavier the weight, right? So that's how we come up with what are high and urgent priorities. And of your $116.5 million, $89 million of it is high priority. So that's a bad mix. And I'm telling you that from experience. I do hundreds of these. And I'm going to make a recommendation to just, all we do is a priority workshop. So I'll do that with Peter and team in the subsequent month. But we're gonna open up all of those high priority items and just try to understand it. Because if they're just, hey, there's operational or energy savings, that's a lot different than these could shut down the building. And so we'll run that to ground and come back to you with some better information, some better data. So I've asked the question, if you have $116.5 million in needs today, I asked the software, how much will you have in needs in 30 years? And so in 30 years, that number became $373 million. Okay, this isn't throwing any money at the problem. This is just as things expire over 30 years. I thought it was interesting. You're at 116 today. In 5 years, you're at 135. So that's not a big lift, right? That's not a big bump. But that 10-year, that's a pretty significant step up. So you go from 116 to 182 in 10 years. Again, just total needs based on life. Did I go too fast? So you're doing it right. Good. So one of the metrics that we'll coach you to use is called facility condition indexing. This is a asset management metric. It was actually established by the Navy in the late 80s. Essentially what it says is after you do a condition assessment, you're going to know what your CRV, that your current replacement value is, but you're also going to know what your needs. And so you can ask the question, for this building, what percentage of its value is in deferral? You know, if it's it's a $300,000 house, it's got $30,000 worth of needs, it's got a 10% FCI. Okay, so it's just to simplify the math. So you can see a brand new building is going to have a 0% FCI, 0 to 5 is good, 5 to 10 is fair, 10 to 30 is poor, above 30 is critical. The asset management industry recommends try to maintain a 10% FCI. So inherent in that philosophy is the understanding that deferred maintenance is not a bad word, not a bad thing. It's okay to have some deferred maintenance, but you want to have a plan as to how much to have. And you also want to make sure that what's in your deferred maintenance are not those high priority things that represent a lot of risk, right? And you have the data. You have the data to make these good decisions now. So this is your, so the FCI for your portfolio right now is at 17.1%. Okay, so we want that 10%. You're right now at 17.1. Without any funding, just straight needs, you go into critical in 2034. Okay, so right now you're in that poor range. And we saw earlier, you're flat for a couple of years and then you start going up and up and up. You get into that critical spot. You do have some funding, so we'll look on the next slide here. You can see here is if you are to spend $1.2 million, your average allocation for the next 30 years. If you were to keep that same going, you could see what it would do to your FCI curve. It does bring it down a little bit. You actually buy a couple more years before you get in the critical spot. But what I think is really neat is that we can ask the software, how much would it cost you as a district to maintain a 10% FCI? So this is the answer for a 30-year view. You can ask it for 5 or 20 or whatever you'd like. But for a 30-year view, to ride that 10% FCI line as a district, you're going to need to come up with $10.18 million each year in capital allocation. Now, there's some assumptions that you're assuming that you're going to have the same buildings for the next 30 years, that you're not going to add any more buildings, okay? That's what today's existent real estate set. That's the number that you would need. So if you're at 1.2 right now, you would need an additional 8.98 allocated, okay? So, and I know that's a big number, and that's a bit of a shocker, but in a data-driven conversation, it's a good place to start. I thought it might be interesting, and I got permission from Boise to show this to you. Boise School District is a customer of ours. So Boise has a portfolio that is more than twice your size. Actually, that's not true. They're 4.5. Okay, so just about double your size. Their average age is 34 years. Your average age was 41. Their deferral is $84 million, which is significantly less than yours, right? Interestingly, that's really an interesting, easy one to point out, that their deferral is less than yours and they're twice the size. Look at the challenges that they have, though. Look at the sort of big towers that they have in subsequent years, where yours was pretty flat, couple blips. Okay, so theirs is they've got a really aggressive campaign for their deferred maintenance, but they got a monster to contend with every year to try to get that down. And their FCI is at 7%. They do a lot of building, right? They do a lot of new construction. New construction brings that FCI number down for portfolio. But I just found all that to be sort of interesting. That FCI number, we can show you that for every one of your buildings as well as your portfolio, so you can really get to a high level of analysis. I think that is it for me.
So there's, I mean, as you can imagine, there's 30,000 line items underneath that. But I think it's always important to just point out at this point that sometimes when you see it like 116 million, that's not your number. That's never the number. And because facilities planning is exactly what Mark talked about, is that you replace a building, if you make additions to buildings, if you take buildings offline, that number fluctuates. And so if you replace, let's say you replace a high school, typically your high school is your biggest numbers. Well, you could spend a lot of money to replace a high school, but then your deferred maintenance goes plummets, as you can see. So don't get fixated on the number. I know it's a big number to look at, but a lot of people want to fixate on that big $100-some million. No, because it's not the planning number. And so, and the other piece to that is that when you do an educational adequacy assessment, oftentimes adequacy, which is hard to measure from a cost standpoint, Adequacy can add 20-25% cost to what you have. Imagine that. So you know that systems can expire and expire and expire, but buildings just don't change overnight to fit educational programs. They just don't. And so we don't have life cycles on the welding programs space because welding will go forever, I guess. And it's hard also to measure on a cost when you're talking about things like that we measure things like square footage. And so for instance, if we go in and we say your standard is 850 square feet for a classroom, and I walk into a building, and none of your buildings like this, but I walk into buildings that have 600 square foot. I don't know how to make a room 850 square foot without taking out other rooms and moving walls and doing that. And that's a hard number to get to. Does that make sense? And so that's why I'm always, kind of cautious and I've heard Mark talk on this too, is that number is the baseline for discussion. And again, it's those top priorities, which are typically life safety and all those things that you want to get out of your way first. But let's get to a facilities plan and see what you're going to have to fix and what you're going to have to replace in time. The educational adequacy is really about that. It's really about focus on how you deliver education in those buildings. So it focuses on, kind of the resources, technology, all the things it takes to teach in a classroom. And so we measure things like, wireless access and even the components in the space. We got it down to clocks, because your clocks are automated too, making sure that every classroom had equitable access to the educational program it's served. And so we cover probably 30 or 35 line items in that, which includes outdoor things. We look at make sure every elementary has a kindergarten playground or has wireless access on the outside that's separated, car drop off and bus drop off. Those are all educational adequacy things that we look at. And so the other thing is that when we look at it, we're not concerned if they're broke or not. So I can walk in, I say, if your standard is an LED TV, right? Tracy doesn't care if it works. Mark cares if it works. I just need to make sure it's there. And so they'll get captured somewhere, but oftentimes something like technology gets captured twice because I just want to see that the component's in there. Now, so we measure and we do a comparison across the board on a point system. Again, it's a weighted value that obviously life safety, all those components that are directly related to that take the highest weight. But we also measure, put on a priority, things like technology. That's very important to your district. And so we weight it and then we give it a point value. And then we rank it. And so these numbers, first of all, doesn't mean that one school is better than the other about what's going on inside the building. I think that's really important to note. But there are schools that don't have all the educational components that every other school has. And so a lot of times what educational adequacy does is that if you get, let's say you get two schools that are sitting at 35% and you've only got money for one of them, you may go to the educational adequacy and say, well, we may want to take care of this building first because its educational adequacy is worse. So it almost becomes a more prioritization tool for you. But also, if you saw the line items in there, you can correct a lot of these things that are in those spaces. And so, so you can see the rankings here. And again, not a vast gap here. And I'm going to tell you why. That what this district has done is, sometimes, and I say this all the time, the curse of a facilities plan is a good custodial crew. Because when you walk into buildings, they're in good shape. They are really good shape. And educationally, they're in good shape. You can walk into your oldest buildings here, and the components that we look for are there. Because this district made a priority that all the stuff that every room has, the other room's going to have it. And so it was difficult to kind of measure gaps, to be honest with you, because the district has done a good job of maintaining that kind of equity across the board. And so this really does look at that. And so you can kind of see the rankings on here. And it goes, again, we have 1,000 line items by school also. And so that kind of gets wrapped up in the back of the database too. So we also measure things like, gymnasiums, cafeterias. Now this is important. Cafeterias are really important when it comes to like size, because, that's size of cafeterias, especially at elementary grade levels, has a lot to do with capacity of a facility. This country has done a really good job of 1950s, 60s, 50s and 60s buildings of making additions without growing, the cafeterias. You work in Boise, you know that. And all of a sudden you're serving lunch from 9 a.m. to 1:30 because there's not enough space in your cafeterias. So things like this, we measure more for equity to make sure that when students walk in, they get the same experience. And we also do that on average class size, classroom size. So that is actually square footage size. And so you can see variances of average classroom size. This isn't student size. This is actually the size of the room. And you can see some variances out there. And one of the things that's important is that, you know, that space size and this with the square footage per student can matter. And it can matter also on the opposite side, that too much square footage means you're maintaining too much. And so we're trying to measure and trying to see where we can gain some equity across the board. So every building has a profile to it, an educational profile to it. And again, this is where, and Mark talked about the facility condition index. We note that in here, so we know all the pertinent data. And again, this is a good tool for board members. Like when you're on a community and you're carrying, because the state of schools is this big, you'll be able to throw it in your backpack and not add any weight to it. When somebody asks you, pull that out and you can say, well, at Central Elementary, this is what's going on here. And it's a quick snapshot that you don't have to go scrambling everywhere to go find data on. Includes geocoding of the students on the boundaries, so you can see where students live and where they're attending from. And so that's all, and this is all going to be, at the end of this, you're all going to have on our side, you're going to have software, but also you're going to have you're just going to have a dashboard. It's a live dashboard. It's going to be front facing for your community, and also have some back facing things that you can manipulate in the background so you can see that. You know, we don't share all information out there because it's student data. So we want to make sure that we protect some of that in there. But you can see that every school has a profile to it, and it's a quick reference for all of you to be able to use during this process. The committees that we use, certainly this community district facilities team is going to be, it's 15 or 20 members. You know the team, a very diverse group of people that bring a lot of diverse backgrounds. I think it's really, really important from the perspective of different people on this task force, on this committee. Because it's interesting from a teacher perspective to a facilities director perspective to a city manager perspective about what goes on in school districts. And so because there's perception out there that people don't know what's going on, they're not in the trenches every day. And so it's good to have this kind of committee in here. We're going to meet 4 or 5 times during the process, including a community meeting. And I think is a community meeting on there next on the slide here. Yeah, so we want to make sure that we stay transparent. And this is really important. Transparency is important. We don't have any data to hide. There's nothing to hide here. I mean, your buildings are going to be exposed as they've ever been, and that's a good thing. We want to make sure that people know what needs to be done to these facilities. And so we leave it open to the public. We will, again, based on your decisions about how we conduct community meetings, we will hope to conduct them live, but they're always online, and there's always going to be an opportunity to watch it online and to take surveys online. So we offer it to as many people as possible. Again, we will follow, the policies of the time, and that it may change as we go. You've been through it all, so we will follow that protocol, whatever comes to bear. Now, the options piece. This is probably my favorite piece of planning. Options is that when you start to kind of put all this together, and again, when I talked about that number not being the number, this is where it really comes, and this is where the rubber meets the road. This is where you start to make good decisions about these are your different pathways on how you can solve different things that you're going to face from a facility standpoint. Once again, one of the examples I gave is that maybe you've got a growing area and you don't have enough capacity. So what are those options? Are they going to be additions onto the school? Are they going to be a new school in that area? Are they going to be boundary changes with additions? Are they going to be, so there's all kinds of different pathways to solve these things. And then part of the options is about your funding, is about how much we can fund, because we should also come up with non-capital solutions to capital issues. We should be thinking about how we deliver education in the future differently. One of the examples I give with this is that I've been talking about this for 15 years, and now it's just caught on because we can do it. But I've asked school districts all over the country, like if your projection shows 5,000 high school kids in 10 years, do you really think we need 5,000 seats? And I will tell you that most people don't think you need 5,000 seats for 5,000 kids anymore. But when you start to put a plan together that doesn't show a seat for every kid, you start to panic a little bit. But there's so many different ways to deliver, especially high school education in today's world. It just has to be where the district and the community values are. And so whether it's offering online, you got community colleges, you got Boise State, you got the technical college here, you got all kinds of different pathways that students are taking advantage of. And even to a point, I use my daughter as an example. She gets done with school every day at 12:30. She's an AP student, 6 AP classes, and for some reason, our school district built her a seat until 3:30, and it just sits empty for about 3 hours a day. And I think, wow, I wonder how efficient we can be when there's 100 of my daughters. Or on the opposite side, kids going to career and technical schools. Or so I think about planning that way. So we should be able to come up with good capital options that have non-capital dollars associated with it, but just different delivery models. And we should at least press those things and press us forward a little bit. So again, it's very much data driven. We're looking at all these things, including that community input. That's really important. And when we go out to the community, and we're going to take options out to the community, we're not asking them to vote on them. You know, voting on options is perhaps the most ridiculous way to go out to a community with options. We actually go out and we just get their opinion on benefits and challenges of the options we present. We want to weight those options against each other. And oftentimes the options that we go out to the community with, I say often, but almost never come back to be recommendations. They're oftentimes a good blend of the strengths of the good ones and getting rid of the weaknesses of the bad ones, and combine together to come up with really good options and recommendations for you. So that's the options part is a lot of fun for me. I think it's the kind of the sausage making of what we do. And so if you could be included in that, we typically re-wallpaper a room with flip charts and good mapping and all the stuff over the wall. So it's a lot of fun to be a part of it. You want to be a part of it. And then finally, just our timeline. Yeah, we expect that this will be done again March through April, and that timeline for you. Again, if you think that that might be too quick for you, you know, we put on the brakes. If you need to accelerate it, we push on the gas a little bit. But it's laid out to really meet with the facilities committee through the next few months, go out to the community in the early part of the year, and then kind of vet all that stuff through the spring, and then get this to you in the spring. And again, whatever you want to do with the plan, then you have time to think about it as you go into the new year. Typically, if we're going to deliver a plan like this in March or April, and there's a big impact on a school, for instance, and I keep using this even though it may not ever be an option for you, if there's a boundary change, it typically couldn't happen in the following year. But we'll give you a process on how to do those things, how to implement that too. So part of the deliverable that you get is an implementation plan on how you can get through those things too. So you can see that timeline, and again, it's estimated because you get a little weather out here occasionally, and sometimes we got to cancel stuff and postpone it and bring it back. So we'll be as flexible as we can do with it. And then finally, a lot of stuff that you get in this. And again, the idea is that I'm not going to give you this huge booklet that you'll never ever pick off the shelf again. It's going to be a dashboard. You've got a software program now. You can be so much more proactive in facilities management as you're going to move forward out of this plan. So we're super excited about that for you all too. So with that, Mark, I'll take any questions that you might have. I know we probably just do a lot of you in about a half hour there, so we appreciate the time.
I have one curiosity. You talked about the educational adequacy. Ours ranges from 25 to 31. I don't recall you saying anything about like what is good, bad. Mark giving us some different benchmarks of that. I'm just curious if there are and where we fall in that.
And that's a really good question. And what's interesting is there weren't any really spikes of bad or poor in there, because again, we weighted a lot of it on life safety, which your school district has done a really good job with. So making sure good signage is there, making sure that the technology is there. You put the vestibules in for double entry. You put the call buttons in to enter the buildings. Those are big trigger marks right there. Where you might have gotten knocked a little bit of square footage on some of your older buildings, likely, and some of those buildings that probably aren't being used for what they were intended to be used for at first, which again, every district goes to. You probably have, well, you do. You have buildings out there that are elementary schools or alternative schools that weren't intended to be those. And so those will get knocked down too. So those are some of the, but again, we didn't see any spikes of poor across the district. And again, I think that's just can be attributed to good investment into the educational component when you probably prioritize that over some of the condition stuff because it directly impacted the classroom, which is, again, every school board would probably make that decision.
Sure. Thanks.
Any other questions?
I have a question that may be silly, but so how does Nova fall into play? I know we don't house them, but you did talk about there's more than one way to have a seat for kids and things like that. And so will we see that data in parts of this, or where will that show up? How will we see that?
So I think that's the first thing we'll do is we'll track enrollment on it. to make sure that that's going to be one of the more important components of it. But I think what we're learning in kind of this transition, but now that it's been kind of speed up a little bit, this online learning component is that there's actually going to need to be space for online learning, which is kind of ironic. Even the University of Phoenix has space. And so how does that impact the types of space you'll need in the future, I think is an important component. And as we explore that and we explore with curriculum what that might look like in the future, I think especially when we're looking at secondary education, in our options, we're going to have to make sure we factor in how the online can affect that. So it could be a matter of reducing the capacity. Let's say you replace a high school. Again, I'm just being hypothetical and anything. Let's say you replace a high school. We would consider about, looking at projected enrollment to see, do we meet that projected enrollment or where can we back off? Because capacity, so a number equals a square foot times a dollar starts to add up quickly. And so that's where it's going to come into play a lot. But also knowing that we can build more flexible spaces in our schools where online students can actually come and socialize and congregate when they have to. So I think that'll come into play, just not sure how yet. And it's kind of a mystery to me yet, but as we go through with you guys, we'll know more.
Anything else?
Could you talk a little bit about the community meetings and what you'd be getting information on from those?
So we will actually, before the community meeting goes out, we will release a presentation online so people have kind of a good baseline if they choose to go to that, to explore that. So how we'll set it up is that we'll do a presentation up front. Again, very short, concise, but the data will be there for them to see. And then through the options, what we'll do is we'll set it in small groups and we'll have a discussion, a small group discussion, where they'll talk about kind of benefits and challenges of each option. And then we have some written documentation. Those who participate online won't get that group participation. But what we find is that people who do attend actually will stay engaged in the conversation, and we'll get a lot of feedback on why an option can work and why it can't work when we're sitting in a group. And so the meeting lasts an hour and a half or 2 hours. We facilitate, so we'll have the facilities group actually sitting at tables with community members because they're probably the most informed. Along with district members, we'll be rotating the room and also sitting with your community members. So it kind of builds into a consensus building atmosphere. And again, I've kind of changed my theory on the group discussion to be to take it away kind of from a survey to more of a discussion point on each option, because I've just found it's more fruitful. We get so much better engagement and comment from that, and it helps us make better decisions. So it's a very interactive, one. Now, obviously during the pandemic, we were doing community meetings and we were doing interactive online platforms that we could do. One of the cool things that our survey tool does is that as responses come in, you can watch the responses live throughout the progression of it. And so I think that's very interactive too. And so you can see where kind of options are starting to flow and where the direction might be from the community side of it. So it's a pretty interactive process. And I think, again, sometimes you really look for the positive out of the bad. And I think one of those positive things that taught us and a lot of us who work in this industry how to be more interactive with our participants. And instead of just putting something out there and letting them respond to it, we're really being more interactive with them. I've actually enjoyed the interaction, even online interaction.
Madam Chair, if I may, just another question regarding that. So will this be more like an RSVP thing, or is this an open house?
The community meeting will be open house.
Okay,
We
so
will.
whoever shows up will find a seat at a table and have a discussion, not
Yep.
so much an invitation.
Yeah. And we're going to make sure that we communicate with principals. I think that's one of the things we might have left out of here. One of the key components of this is keeping the principals informed, because they're almost that first line of defense when those options come out and people are like, oh, they're going to do this to your school, and the principal goes, oh, I didn't know that. So one of the things is keeping those principals informed. But part of that responsibility back on the principals will be help us get community members out. Get the word out to your community. Look, we understand people are busy. We understand people don't want to get in big crowds too at times, and that's fine. That's why we offer that interactive online too.
Well, thank you guys very much. I know I'm excited for you guys to dig in deeper and we appreciate it. Thank
So
you.
we're equally excited. So thank you very much for your time tonight. Thanks. Thank you.
You're good.
Yeah, see you all tomorrow.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Anita is gonna come and we're just going to give you some benchmarks on the fall IRI and where we're at so that you know where we're starting and where we're heading. Thank you so much. Good to see you guys again. Wanted to jump in right with our fall IRI. I was hoping by waiting that we would get the state results, that we could have the final state report, but they still have not released it even as of today. And so just to know that everything up there is what has been shown on our state website, except for the data I'm going to share with you today. This is our preliminary brand number, so it may be different slightly from what the state reports here when they do finally release our fall results. You will see we compared to last year when we administered the fall IRI, we did it remotely for the first full big administration from being not with our kids in person administering this. So you'll see in that dark blue bar, fall 2021, that we saw a drop in every single grade level. One to really keep an eye on is our kindergarten fall data has always been a pretty good indicator of how kinder ready they are, right? Coming in first few weeks of school, we administered this test. We saw a significant drop from 42% to 28% of our kids that came in to start kinder ready, so to speak. So that is the lowest we've had our kinders come in since we took on this new assessment. So we do have some work to do in that area specifically. And then you'll also see that we saw those drops with second and third grade being the lowest we've seen our kids come in at the fall. And then first grade, not our lowest, but lower than the year before. So we always like to take a little time to talk about those sub-tests, right? Because the test is made up of different little tests that are a part of that assessment. You'll see over on that left-hand side our overall score. So that's just a summary of what you saw on the page before. And you'll see that our kinder students, while they were not kinder ready, they had really strong listening comprehension. It means that they could hear what was being asked of them and they were able to select those things. But a real surprise for us is just how low their letter knowledge is. You can see that that's being able to know that's an A, right? Upper and lowercase letters and those sounds that they make. Interestingly enough, a strength was phonemic awareness, which is a more complicated piece. It's those word parts that we use that make up words, right? And being able to, that understanding all those spoken words are comprised of individual sounds. And so we have our work cut out for us there. We really need to work on that letter identification and that letter knowledge early in that piece. And then also vocabulary is pretty low for our incoming kinder group. So then we weren't going to stay back on that page for just a minute, Peter. Sorry, I just got excited about kinder for a bit. First grade, we like to give just about every subtest they have. Their letter knowledge was strong, but their phonemic awareness was very strong, which is a really good sign because that's one of those foundational pieces of early literacy. Alphabetic decoding falls right in within that, and that's being able to blend letters into sounds so that they can hear all those word parts as they say them out loud. Comprehension was a struggle for them. I want you to look at that nice big jump in vocabulary. We see some real strength in our first, second, and third grades in that vocabulary area, with spelling being another area that drops back down in a lower category for us to look at. So then as we look at second and third grade, again, they don't take as many of those subtests. They just take that comprehension, vocabulary, spelling, and text fluency. But just a friendly reminder, text fluency is not included in how they calculate a student's score because it's an online text fluency assessment. So again, our third graders had that good pop in spelling, so that's a good sign. But look at that vocabulary. We did something with vocabulary in the last year, so hopefully we can build off that strength and get those scores up by the end of the year. So just a little summary of our subtests. We always like to look at our subgroups and see how they did. We only do subgroups that were subgroups that were 20 or more kids. So if they had less than 20 kids, we didn't include it because we didn't want it to be identified too easily. We do see that we that our white Caucasian students at that got 47.7%. Interesting gap for our Hispanic students there. That subgroup population has a gap of 19.9% difference. And so something to look at as we go into this year, but really closing that 2 or more races gap. It's getting closer as we go into this year and that fall test. So we need to look at those as interesting. And then we kind of wanted to see, one of the things we've always talked about when I presented this to you is that we start to work on closing that gap as the longer the kids are in our system, right? They tend to be the farthest apart in kindergarten, which we see pretty clearly. We have that true statement happening. And we see the gap there a little smaller in first grade, a little smaller in second grade, and a little smaller in third grade. And that did hold true this year as well, and how our groups kind of close that gap over time. Interesting note is that in third grade, our 2 or more races actually outperformed our white students, which is something to kind of look at in that category as well. Special education data. We always say it's affirming to know that this group of kids is needing our support and services in these areas. And we do, of course, kind of see that gap shrink from kinder to first to second grade. I do want you to know and keep in mind that our kinder group usually has less kids included in that because they're usually their first year in school. So not as many have been identified with the need for special education services. And then also keep in mind, the nice thing about special education is when you close the gaps, right? We exit you from special education services, but then you're no longer counted. So just kind of keep that in mind as you see some of those changes happen over time. And we usually reevaluate every 3 years. So kinder, first, second to third grade, sometimes we have those kids exiting special programs. So just keep that in mind as you look at those pieces of card. And then LEP status. The method kind of holds true, but the longer you're in our program, the more success we have at closing that gap. It's really important to note in our kinder group that we are screening kids, right, to enter into LEP services for that limited English proficiency. And I'm going to take a wild guess, by the time I share with you again, there'll probably be almost 100 more kids counted in that group. So that's going to also change some of that information because we're still going through the screening those kids to enter them into that LEP service. But that kind of lets you see how we're doing in that area. And that is just our big summary of our fall IRI data, and I'm glad to answer any questions you might have.
I'm sure I have a question.
Yeah.
I'm just curious if the Hispanic Latino gap that we see here is typical. Why do we see that? You know, what are, because I mean, this is our community, and how are we addressing that? What are ways in which we're attempting to catch that earlier and earlier, I suppose? And
Part of it is we do kind of see that the gap shrinks the longer you're in our program, right? But we're not closing that gap all the way by third grade. And really it's looking at some of the vocabulary and language that we expose kids to, and how do we help make sure that they're getting a good sampling of that conversation. And you know, that's one of those hurts for us last year is our conversations, a lot of them took place virtually. And so we didn't have as many group items going on. So I'm hoping it was a greater gap than we're used to seeing in our Hispanic students. But I do see it working and closing that as they get older into our system.
And do you have your speculation why that is, why we started out so much there?
So
Is that an impossible
interesting. Well, I do think part of it is that we were in a unique place last year because we were asking kindergartners who were just learning to use devices 2 or 3 weeks into school with their parents' help to take an assessment from us. And so I do want to keep just kind of those pieces in mind because some parents may have been more helpful than other parents in taking that assessment. So please take some of that with just a little grain of salt. But I do think that we also have a great opportunity for that collaboration and getting conversation taking place with kids to expose to a greater amount of vocabulary in the classroom. So I do think we'll see some changes in that, but that's my 2 cents. Anyone else have something else they want to? Okay.
Madam Chair, if I may, and I'm sorry, this is probably a redundant question, but the very first slide, I know you said we haven't seen any state numbers yet, so it's hard to say, but from the chatter, this is kind of common for this year. I'm assuming that numbers are just coming in lower. Is this what you're hearing, or is it impossible to say until you see numbers?
I think it might be impossible to say until we see numbers because some schools did it virtually and remotely, and some schools did it in person.
That's
And
true.
So I honestly
Yeah,
don't know.
hard
the
to
answer.
Yeah, okay, we'll wait for the state.
Yep, and then we can see the other districts.
Right, and it'll be interesting, I guess, to see. I mean, will they categorize it as in last year this district was online and last year this district? Because that's tricky, because Eastern Idaho had some schools that never really went online, right? Or for a very short time.
I don't know, we'll see if they
Yeah,
put that in there, but I don't know.
Interesting, okay, thank you.
Just out of curiosity, like when you go to kindergarten, right, and that huge change in vocabulary and that kind of thing. So I think all these IRIs are the same test, no change, right? And
Different subtests are given, I mean,
Yeah.
yeah, grade level, so the test gets more complicated, but less subtests, and so it's important to keep that in mind, because you're expected to grow.
right, and so I guess I thought, well, would it be worthwhile, and I don't know how you would do that, to even go back and go, were the vocabulary words harder or different, you know what I mean, to compare between the 2 years? They're probably though pretty similar though, were they, or?
Most definitely, actually, because on that first assessment of the year, it doesn't start differentiating based on skill. It is the same kinder test. Of course, a large bank of questions, but the first assessment of the year is almost the similar exact as the year before.
So huge change in number, but the test is pretty regulated, straight on, no changes to that.
In the fall, yes, it does change because it gets harder and easier and
Yeah.
changes subtext based on your performance throughout the year. But the first one is the entry level test. and that's it.
I mean, I think one, it's important, right, that this is initial and it's hard to compare last year's kinder to this year's kinder because they are different kids. But I noticed that our first graders last year in the fall scored a 39. Now, granted, as second graders, they're not taking the same test, but notice that that was a 10% jump with our second graders with the IRI to the 49%. So I know that too is not a straight across like, okay, that means 10, you know, we went from this 39% to 49%, but a pretty good indicator that something good happened in our district from first to second grade within this last year, and some retention of things and learning, whether it's, you know, what areas it was in. But yeah, I'm anxious to see where we're at, winter, spring.
Are there some major changes that are happening in our classrooms as a result of this?
There has been a lot of focus in the core 5, and I'll let Shelley speak to that if she'd like, but just some different things that we're doing in that early literacy to really help move those kids along in that early literacy skills and making sure they have all those foundational pieces in place so that we're not letting them fall behind and they didn't actually capture all their letter knowledge to build into that next piece. So really looking through all the components of that, of our early literacy instruction.
We have added really great reading, which we started end of last year, which is really strong and it's tight in its early literacy skills. And so we've been doing that, and we have been meeting with the person where we're sometimes giving kids 2 or 3 dips within a day while not sacrificing their core instructional journey. And then we've leaned in, we purchased Core 5, Lexia Core 5 this year, and so kids are put at their level and then they're able to work from there. So it is not based on grade level necessarily, it places them at a level and then they work on fulfilling from that space. And so that paired with really strong interventions, which now that we have good data and we've assessed core phonics assessment, ICE stations, really great reading assessment, spelling inventory, whatever we're using, then we're able to put them in really good groups and start to run our tier 2 interventions. So most schools are starting their tier 3 intervention right now as well.
And those were plans you had in place. So you're feeling like you had some pretty good solid plans and you're keeping with those. Does it sound like as a result of these numbers, you're adding or changing?
We knew that we had goals that we were going to be filling. And we purchased Core 5 anticipating that. That's a big change. We have not had that system-wide. So that is something that's new, and really great reading in all of our buildings is new. That we had it in some, not all.
That you had planned and had been doing. Awesome. Thank you.
We're seeing this now, that our teachers in our schools have had this, and we've had like 2.5 months of instruction already.
It's November 1st.
Yeah.
No, and most of our assessments were given in early September. We just had to take the whole window before we could really look at those, but they were able to look at the data right after.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Dr. Russell is going to give us information on where our teams are starting in our math cells.
All right, just wanted to update you this evening on our MAP assessment and then kind of share with you how it might be helpful in our system and instruction to teachers. So that'll be my kind of goals today. Before I start off, I want to share with you a strong balanced assessment system in a school district. If you kind of look at some of these big components, the first one you'll see up here, I can't see it because I don't know why I won't do that, but classroom formative assessment, that is what you'll see in the classroom every day. Those would be a teacher assessing student work, either observations or by collecting assignments or by doing quizzes or by doing tests. That is the vast majority of assessment that takes place in the school district. And it's formative. So it's designed to guide instruction, be able to see where the kids are learning and taking advantage of the instruction that's taking place. You'll see on the other side of that, there is grading, which is more summative. When I need to get a grade in the grade book, I'll take a final assessment to see if the students have learned the material or not, and that will go in. Above that, you'll see two smaller blocks. The one is the accountability. You can see that as our SBAC. That's what the state would require, that we give one time a year. That's why it's a smaller block, because it doesn't occur often. And then the interim benchmark, which you'll see is on, why my thing will go to the wall, but it won't go into TV. The interim benchmark is on the formative side of it. So the idea of this is that we'd have it a couple of times a year, not nearly as much as these, but it would be more performative to guide instruction to help teachers understand what kids are. So I'm not going to go through the whole list of why we chose MAP, but you can see there are several there. One of the first is, just as I mentioned, it's really to design where are our kids at? What is the instruction that they're ready to learn? It's really important, because if I know this is where my kids are at, and I know where they should be, then I know where that gap is and how I need to fill that instruction. It aligns highly to the SBAC. So that's one thing that's really positive, and I'll share with you in a little bit how it can be a predictor for how our students perform on that assessment at the end of the year. And it really should help, as I just said earlier, about understanding what that gap is, help our professional learning teams become more efficient and precise and determine what student needs are. And I'll be able to share that with you in just a second too, how we've been able to do some of this. So here's an example of how our students came in. You'll see on some of this is math assessment, and you'll see the grade level, the number of students who took it. And I'll give you a RIT score, and a RIT score is a number, and I'll show you in a second how that number translates to kind of instructional practices. But it just lets you know where the majority of the kids came in, and then some statistics parts, some standard deviations in the median. And you can go down based on that. You'll see down here, similar with our secondary students, how many students took it, the RIT scores that they had, standard deviation, and the median. So if you do the next slide, this is where it kind of starts becoming a little more helpful, because what it does is it breaks down this RIT score into certain areas. You can see strengths and weaknesses of the students. Operations and algebraic thinking, it'll give you some means on how they did. The numbers and complex systems, it'll give you some information, geometry, and statistics and probability. So you can take that information, and I'll give you an example, like I said in a moment, that if I know where a student's at 214 under real and complex number systems, it can actually give me the instructional things that they're ready to learn. This is just the same thing in reading. And you'll see where our students came in kind of based on numbers and RITs. And the next slide will tell you a little bit more detail about where they came in at literature, reading informational text, and the vocabulary acquisition, understanding some vocabulary terms and context in there. So one of the interesting things about it, as I mentioned, is it's helpful for us to give us an idea of where our students might score when it comes time for us to take the SBAC. So see here is, this is an example of where a student scored. It says they're about the 68th percentile. If you do a national norm, they would fall in the upper end here. Eventually, when we take the winter one, we'll be able to see their growth and kind of how that growth achieved over compared to everyone else in the nation. That's not able to filter now because we only have one assessment since the first one we did. Over here, it'll give you an idea that this student would be a level 3 on the SBAC, which gives an indicator right now the student's on track to be a proficient student. It also can give you on track with how they're going to do on ACT or SATs. And then the last one here, it gives you a lexile level, which is their ability to read informational text and where they are at. It gives you a range, which is also helpful for a teacher to know that if the curriculum that we're reading is meeting them at their instructional level, or if it's above their level or below their level, and can help you plan some instruction that way. So this one is the one where this is where actually it becomes very helpful for teachers. So for example, the student scored a 215 on their rate in math. Just like I mentioned, you can break it down into various numbers, and I'll break that student down into various numbers where you can see their strengths and weaknesses. So obviously the student's very strong in operations and operating thinking, but they are struggling a little bit more in real and complex number systems. So I can take this RIT score and I can actually break it down, and it tells me what these students are ready to learn. And so this student is ready to develop these skills because they fall within this number range, basically between a 201 and 210. And so they're able right now to look at coordinating planes and points on 4 quadrants and graph, et cetera, et cetera. So when we used to have this years ago, just an example, when I was a teacher, I would be able to pull this out. I could look at my students of where they were scored. And so, this was geometry. It could let me know that these 8 or 9 students are ready to learn these materials. And these 10 or 11 students are ready to read these materials. And then I could look at my curriculum and say, I'm going to hit that here, or maybe I need to extend more here because there's gaps in it. Or I could plan more intervention for them because they need more time in geometry or real complex number systems. So it gives you a real nice starting point and a place to really look at your curriculum that you're about to teach. So one of the things that after our first assessment, we realized there's just some logistic things that we learned. One of them was rostering students to the assessment. There was numerous assessments, so it was kind of difficult for teachers to find which assessment to put the student in. We realized we got to clean that up. So we have. Also, we originally asked English and math teachers to give the assessment, and now we're going to allow every teacher to give that assessment, so that can take place in mentoring courses, or it can take place in other times, so it doesn't take as much instructional time from one subject. And then the last one is we have had some technical difficulties with it working on the iPads. Apple and NWA are right now they're not talking well, so I'm still working through some technology things. So what we'll see in December is hopefully we'll start seeing some of that growth. As I mentioned, be able to see how much growth they've made compared to where the growth should be. That'll be really interesting for us. It'll give us another step to see if the instruction that we've given in the last 2.5 months is making progress with them, and allow me to know where to kind of plan our next instructional piece as we go into our spring semester. So it should help our professional learning teams just be have another data point and hopefully be that much more efficient in how they plan their assessment and instruction. Questions?
Yeah, Madam Chair, I have 2 questions. Mostly for clarification for me. So I'm looking at slide 9 for like the sample student growth. So each teacher, and maybe you should clarify, so are the elementary teachers not being able to use this right now because the kids can't do it on the iPad? Or is it still
No, we
happening?
made it. It just
Okay,
was a little
it's
bit more
just tricky.
difficult. It was
Okay,
just,
understood.
yeah, it would kind of glitch at times.
Okay. So each teacher then has access for each student with this kind of information, right? That's so cool. Very cool. And how often are they taking the math assessments?
So we're taking it once in the fall, once in the wintertime, and we will take it once at the very end of the year mostly.
Before or after the ISAT?
So that's what we're in discussions now. Today, the secondaries just decided that they would like to take it after ISATs, but we have to get input from our elementaries to make the ultimate decision.
Okay, very cool. And then how much of this, and you mentioned a little bit, maybe moving some of these to other teachers, such as the mentoring teachers, so that, stay up class time. What kind of I don't want burden is kind of like a lame word to use this, but what kind of pressure does it put on teachers or take away out of classroom time I think it's an awesome tool, so I'm not being critical of it, I'm just saying, is this taking classroom time, is this making things harder for them, or what does it look like?
Yeah, so the assessment should take anywhere from 45 to 50 minutes, so that, you know, in high school, that's half of a period, but it took longer this fall. Partly because of the first time we did it, the rostering was an issue, and that kids actually took a little bit longer on it, which is good. We wanted to do that. So when we got that feedback, we realized, well, we can't keep just putting this burden on these two. We want to spread it out and give schools the option to allow any adult within the school to be able to assign that class. So it should hopefully take less, and we'll know more in September if it does. And if it doesn't, then we got to come back to the drawing board again and try to figure out how can we get that down to around that 45, 50 minute mark. I don't know if I can give you an exact time. Some easily went in that, some went twice that long.
Right. I guess the next question would be, what is the feedback you're getting from teachers on this?
Overwhelmed was the first one. I don't know how to use it well at this point.
Right.
And then people that have dug into it are like, wow, this is incredible. So it's a little bit of everything.
Right.
And I think the overwhelmed is just part of where we are. But I think as they get more accustomed to reading some of this, it will be beneficial. I know there's some folks at Tampa High that Principal Yarborough had mentioned they at first were very concerned. They got into the reports and could see what the reports did for them. And actually, you're like, wow, this is really powerful. So hopefully, as we get stronger with it, we'll.
Another question, sorry, I'm jotting down. So it's, let's say I'm a math teacher, which I would be the opposite of a math teacher in the real world, but man, serious. I'm a math teacher and I get this back. And maybe this is a silly question, but what do you do when you get this back and you're like, I've got kids here and I've got kids here, and now I've got, and I guess that's just a lot of a teacher. So
it is. It's what makes teaching wonderful and difficult all at the same time, because you almost always have that.
right.
It's just
And now it's right clear. But I mean, before you maybe could guess, these kids are struggling, but now it's like, man,
Exactly.
yeah.
So the step you would do as a teacher is to look, okay, where is my class at? What is the content that I need to teach, and how many gaps are there? And really, it's time and resources. So how much time do I need to spend on a certain context or concept to make these students' ability to be proficient on it, and these students? And if I don't have enough time in that, then I need to try to provide that more time. So tier 2 instruction could look differently. So I could do a whole group instruction for this group, pull smaller students back or smaller groups back, or assign them to some of the programs that we have.
Right.
Give them homework in those areas, have their mentoring teacher, have them come see me so I can get some of that additional time.
Right, good.
So it's this kind of juggling act that great teachers do.
Right.
And then it also should gear you with the assessment, so I can really gear in and make sure that these 8 kids, I know they're struggling in this part of geometry. If I give this assessment, did they actually learn that part? If not, then I need to look back again at my instruction, and it's how it should.
Overall, a nice roadmap for teachers to see where they are, where the kids are progressing. How does this work with, say, the program? Oh my gosh, my brain, at the Columbia that they're using.
Oh, Summit.
Summit. How does this work with Summit?
Yeah, well, Summit has a similar where you can, it'll tell you where the students, there's things they need to learn. It should just, what it should allow them to do is look at, do I have to see the gaps here? And where my instruction is telling us, like, so where Summit's really asking them to go, what's their proficiency? So it should just be another piece of data that they already have, just to see if their instruction is making adequate progress as it needs to. Assessment does, Summit does give them a lot of these type of similar things. I think this would just be another opportunity, and this one aligns very highly with the SBAC, so it should give them a clue about where the students.
Yeah, and I like for high school, the ACT and SAT, like on track or not. That's
Right.
stuff. Do parents or students have access to this information?
I don't believe we do at this point.
We can print and use these reports.
Yeah.
I know when I taught, I used to print out some of the reports at conference times and I'd share with them for general to say, hey, the students made incredible growth, very proud of where they are, or this shows us one of the gaps, and at home you could really help them if you did X or Y.
Right.
So it can do some of that.
Okay.
That's what I actually wanted to ask about, was the usefulness for parent-teacher conferences, or is that something that would be used to help parents understand where their student is?
Yeah, I think as we get more skilled and familiar with understanding how to read the reports and get into it, again, being our very first time, we've taken it in the last 13 years since we last did it. It was very beneficial for me as a teacher.
And then, so will there be more professional development for teachers on these things, or how, okay, yeah, I'm seeing head shake. Because I heard overwhelmed and teachers don't need a whole bunch more things to do.
They don't.
So, right, so this is,
There's a, yes.
so more instruction and opportunities.
There'll be more
to
opportunities and times to work through it. We'll do some training with teachers, administrators. We had some with their principals the first time of kind of getting themselves wrapped around it. We talked about it today in one of the principal meetings and stuff, kind of help guide them so they can help guide the department heads and grade levels.
Yeah, it seems like a great tool.
Madam Chair, if I can ask one more question. Why did we get away from it 13 years ago? What was the difference? Why did we say we're gonna back away and
Well,
not use this tool?
I wasn't up at the district office at the time, so I can't answer completely. What I do believe is the state moved away from NWA originally. And in the past, I think because the contract we had access to it. And so like many things was probably a funding issue. We're going to fund that. And if the state was moving towards an SBAC assessment, I think it had a lot to do with that.
It seems like a great tool. I'm excited. Hopefully it'll be beneficial.
Thanks. Dr. Russell, I was just wondering if you could maybe provide just a little history, because it seems like getting a tool like this was in our strategic work goals.
Yeah.
And is this what we're leveraging some of our federal COVID funds?
Correct. Yes. So we were able to use some of our federal funds, and Peter, could you go back to the first slide? One of our strategic plans was to always have a strong assessment system as a district. As I mentioned, cost is always an issue, and how do you be able to get some of those tools? So I think one of the things that we were granted with the ESSER funds is ability to really have a strong interim block or interim assessment system in our district. So tied into our strategic plan that we just talked about, we realized our students came in lower than what we would like, and that gives us some opportunities to be able to see exactly where those needs are.
I think it's great. I think if we end up with some opportunities to be able to share that with students and parents, I'm hopeful that then everybody can work together on all these things.
Thank you, Dr. Thanks. Appreciate it.
Lori Mon and Cindy Dion are here just to bring you up to date on the physical education curriculum update and the process, including the committee and things like that, so that you know where we are in this adoption.
Thanks for having us here tonight. We are looking forward to making a step forward. This has been work, curriculum adoption. It got pushed to the side a little bit because of COVID and access to our greatest resource, which is time. And so we're excited to be able to move a little bit forward on that. So I'm going to let Cindy take over. She's been facilitating this, and let her give you an update.
Yeah, and I'm super excited because part of this, and this is in this slide, that this adoption was so different, that it was so comprehensive that we had to do like mini adoptions in between, right? And one of the things we were going to do is update you every time. Well, we haven't done anything to update. So I'm kind of excited that we get to do this, right? And so this is just a reminder, and many of you maybe even seen this slide, that we're looking at those materials, and then what would implementation look like, and then what PD look like for our teachers at each of those sections. And then again, this is a slide you've probably seen quite often. What does this work overall look like? There's a lot of prep work beforehand, and then that committee work. And I think we have to point out that we formed this initial committee in the winter of 2019-2020. So this is the longest adoption committee in history. And we're only probably halfway done once we get done with the PE part. So not that this is a record we were trying to set, but here we are. But how we did this, we sent out a forms link to all of our NSD staff, to our parents, and to our community members. And then we had to make sure that that committee consisted of at least 25% parent and community member. And then we did bring that committee to the board for approval. Then once we met, we've been looking at the research about comprehensive health, the demographics of Nampa and Canyon County, and the needs of our Nampa School District. And so now we're ready to look at some actual PE material and begin getting feedback from all of our different stakeholder groups. And then we'll eventually come back and make a recommendation to the board. Again, because this idea of comprehensive health was so massive, the committee broke it into 5 different components. We adopted the materials for mental health, and so now we're moving on to physical health. But as we dove into physical health, we realized that's a giant topic. And so we broke that down into kind of a PE class type material, and then the health class, our traditional health class kind of stuff. And so we chose to move forward on that PE class first for a few reasons. The first one is we haven't adopted PE curriculum in a number of years. I again, probably a record number of years. But this also affects such a small number of teachers, but a huge number of kids. And we kind of talked about that all night. There's a lot on teachers' plates. So if we can get lots of new material in kids' hands with only having to affect so many teachers, that'll be a little bit easier to, I think, implement in a year like this. And then the other piece, adoptions do require bringing people together, which requires our teachers to be out of the classroom, which kind of equals subs. And we didn't think that this committee was a great use of our subs right now. And so this was a little bit easier because, again, smaller amount of teachers that we would be with. This adoption could look like we're going to adopt a curriculum K-12. We could also be looking at maybe we're adopting something for our K-5 group, for our 6-8 group, and for our 9-12 group, because they might need some different things. K-12 might need a box curriculum, or 6-8, 9-12 might need that OER type, the open educational resources where we pull some of the activities, but the money really needs to be spent more on the equipment. The other piece that we need to keep in mind is NOVA. What does an online school for PE look like? And so that could be a separate piece as well, because we just don't know until we get in and inventory those things, ask those teachers those questions and that kind of thing. So that's where we are there. Before I get into our timeline moving forward, just a couple of kind of exciting things that have happened as we started talking about getting this committee back together and moving forward. In the spring of 2021, we just started talking informally as the committee, like it could be PE that's next, and just where would we head? And we had one parent bring forward a curriculum that said, we've heard about this, we think this sounds great. We had a bunch of elementary teachers bring forward a curriculum, we've heard about this, we think this is great. So we kind of put that in our bank and started looking online for other things that were out there, like how many things that are out there that are free for us to dig into a little bit. And so that was kind of fun to see what's out there, but you don't get to see everything. So then we had to kind of put a screener together and what are our top priorities in a PE curriculum, and run all of this stuff that we had through that. And those 2 programs that were brought forward by people on our committee rose to the top. So we have a parent, I can't think of the word, suggested curriculum, and teachers. And so those are the 2 that we'll be able to dive into a little bit deeper, which is kind of fun. So just moving forward, in September, we collected all these screeners, and we had to do all this kind of stuff online, and found those 2 programs that did move to the top, so we can narrow in just a little bit. So then in October, we started working on contacting those publishers and kind of bringing that old school, like we can actually bring people in and talk again. And so these publishers are willing to come and let us ask some questions. And just, these are things we didn't see online. So is it really a part of your program and we just didn't see it? So they'll open up their curriculum to us, that K-12 piece, so that we can see it, ask questions, and run through that. So we're hoping to be able to do that in November, but we wanted to give you the update first so that you knew what was going on behind the scenes there before we invited them in. So then in January, after we have the publishers come in, hopefully beginning in November, and then we get all of that feedback from our committee, we'll take a look at all of those pieces and also meet with all of our PE teachers and see if we can't pilot these 2 programs. Just so that we can play with the assessments a little bit. How easy are these lesson plans to follow? When it says that we can do this at home, can we really do it at home? So have that January and February piece to do some piloting and then get that feedback, hopefully from teachers and students. It'd be great to have that student feedback as well. And then the committee will get together and look at all that feedback And then in March, really open this up to our parents and community. And so have, like we've done in the past, the 3 open houses, you know, at different times of day and have people come in and take a look at that. But also really look, are we getting enough parent feedback? Are we getting enough community feedback? And if we aren't, then can we come up with some creative ways to get more voice in there so that they can see what's there? Some of it will be online, but some won't. So how do we balance that? And then what we'll do is bring everybody back together in April, May, take all that feedback from all those different stakeholders, and then come back to you with a recommendation. Yeah, just focused on that PE piece. So any questions about where we're headed? Yeah,
Being
it's-
mindful of,
Yeah.
like, subs, like, right, in those committees and all those things. It's super appreciated.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Excellent.
So, Chairman, we have a guest and we weren't sure how this was going to come together. It's actually item G, and I'm wondering if we could consider item G so that our guest could go home.
Before we start.
Before we
Yes, yeah,
Do you need to make a motion to?
I don't think
We're a
so,
work
because
session.
we're just a work session, and so we're good, as long as we hit everything on it, yeah.
Okay, so I've got my 2 experts here to help answer any of your really good questions, because I probably won't be able to, but I wanted to give you a good update on both the Napa High and Skyview and where we are. We'll start with Skyview. We're going through, keep working with the contractor to nail down where the roof has been leaking. And the report tonight is that it wasn't leaking from folks, so that was good. That's a good bonus as of right now. And we've got them working to put some covering over all of the ducting for the HVAC system. The HVAC system was the one that was on the building. We took off the building and put back because it wasn't at the age to replace it, but it was time to replace the roof. And since then, it's been leaking. Is kind of the assessment there. So we keep working through that, and we keep, pushing through getting this project here. But the thing is that it's the never-ending project because it's supposed to have been done on August 11th. You now know that today is not August anymore. It's really November, and we keep wondering what we need to do and do that stuff. So with where we are with the contractor, we believe we've kind of met the spot where we've managed all the leaks. They have a plan moving forward to finish fixing all the ducting by putting coating on there. They can give a little bit more technical detail on there if you want them. I'm going to try and get it right. And that will hopefully tie that project up here with any luck, the middle to the end of the month. Does that sound about right? Yeah. So that's Skyview. Any questions on Skyview?
I have a question, Madam Chair, if I may.
Yeah.
Can you just walk me through exactly what happened, so I understand? So
Yes.
then needs a new roof.
Yep.
We take the ductwork off in order to put the new roof on.
Yep.
The new roof goes on and it's great, but once the ductwork comes on, it leaks.
Yes.
That is a very concise and accurate description of what
So,
happened.
okay, so the roof is on and it's good, but yet somehow something is leaking.
That is also
Okay.
very concise as to what is happening. The roofer contractors dealing with the leaking and the source of the leaking symptomatically. So right now, we know that it's leaking out of the supply ducting that's in the gym. But they can't seem to find where the source of the water is coming in. They do know that when they went up and they placed tarp over each of the exterior routed return ducts, that the leaking stopped. Now, how it gets from the return duct into the supply duct is somewhat of a mystery at this present time.
And it only leaks when it rains? I mean, it's not like leaking.
That's right.
Okay. So it's definitely coming from the sky, not like
It's coming from the sky.
some cool water from air conditioner.
Yep, it's coming from the sky. We have a cause effect relationship that they are exploring. So they're going to wrap the exterior run mechanical ducting with insulation and roofing membrane to waterproof that segment of it. And then they are going to test that by spraying the equipment with a hose for about an hour to see if anything comes down.
Sounds like a science.
So we're bringing this update to you because the timeline is so long on completing the project. It is one of those things that per the contract, if you guys wanted to take action against them, which the only thing we need to terminate the contract, you could, but that's not our recommendation. We want to push them to keep pushing them to get it done and staying on top of them, even though the past 2 months haven't proven that we could actually get there, but we think we can now.
That and terminating a contract involves a bunch of things, and partly if there's work that's unperformed is needing to get another contractor to come in to perform that work. That involves time and effort on the district part, as well as the architect, the contractor, bonding agency, everybody. For the few items that remain, it seems to be more efficient at this time to proceed with letting the existing contractor finish out.
And if we move forward with liquidated damages, is that the right terminology?
Yes.
Yeah, we have tallied since the date of
August 11th.
yeah,
Okay,
which was the original date of substantial completion, up until substantial completion is defined as the ability of the owner to use it for its intended purpose. So when kids start using classrooms, that's fulfilling the intended purpose, basically.
and when was that? Because that's passed.
At Skyview, it's different than at Nampa High. Skyview was until they were able to hold classes or use the gym for basically its intended purpose, volleyball games, after hours activities or class. And I think that was the week of the 22nd. So it ran from August 11th to the 22nd.
22nd of which month?
October.
October,
That's
sorry.
what I thought.
At $500 a day is what's outlined in the contract.
Is that Monday through Friday or is that every
That's
calendar day?
Calendar day. So, and then we're determining or finalizing the date for liquidated damages for Nampa High, because there's a little bit of the units for the air units for the 500 building classroom weren't yet connected, but there was the temporary solution to get additional airflow into there to make it operable. So we're finalizing that date.
Any other questions on Skyview? Otherwise, we'll kind of give you the rundown of Nampa High. Okay.
Yeah.
The damages to the floor of the gym at Skyview, did the roofing company pay for that fix?
We opened a case with our insurance to go after their insurance. I didn't want to be in the middle of it, but let the insurances take care of what insurance companies do.
And so that claim's been put in and they're currently working with that, but we don't have a resolution yet.
Yes, that is correct. I don't know what the insurance companies, I'm not privy to that part, what they're doing on the back end. I advocated and our insurance company agreed that them taking it on and then working for us, they know upfront that it was the responsibility of the contractor, something went bad, and taking it there. But at the time, we didn't want to trust the contractor's insurance to kind of jump in here in the middle. We took it on our own because we're the owner. That we needed to make sure that we managed that well.
So we paid that bill out of different funds, turned that into an insurance claim, and they're working with that contractor. Is any of these conversations about the contract with this contractor? That shouldn't have any bearing on that claim, should it? Or do we know there's a jeopardy of that?
So let me make sure I understand your question correctly. If we terminated the contract, would that impact this claim?
Correct.
I do not know a good legal answer on that one. Unless you have a good guess as a lawyer.
I'm certainly not a lawyer, representative of the law, but we write into the
the contract, the contractor's responsible to maintain their insurance throughout the whole thing. And they are bonded by a company that specifically insures them for all of this. So if we say you're not performing, you go, the bonding company is on the hook for getting in and finalizing the work, completing the contract, which includes warranties and such. And then damages associated with the contract, I believe. Another thing that we're doing because it's an immediate measure is that we're withholding any further applications for payments on their part. And right now, the balance of that contract at Skyview is $179,000 about. So we're withholding that for payment until all of this gets set.
What is the total in the liquid damages, or have we invoiced any of that yet?
I think the liquidated, well, it goes from the 11th to the 22nd of October, so.
Somewhere around 36,000 by my
Something like that,
calculation.
yeah.
Ish.
Just one question on the efficacy of the current gym. It's currently being used, not leaking as of tonight. So as of the 22nd of October, students are in there using it for classes, using it for after school activities, etc.
Yes,
Is that
like
correct?
girls basketball is practice.
So
Or
can
was
we
practice.
clarify, we have 3 gyms in that building?
We do have 3 gyms there. The main gym is there and functional. One of the uppers
east
is
side.
east side is functional. The other one will be getting repaired from water damage. What's the
Soon,
schedule?
starting soon.
Okay.
As soon as they get the materials here,
So
and
what-
acclimated to our climate and stuff.
So there's
Was
still
water damage to all 3 gyms originally? Okay, and so 2 have been repaired, are currently being used. We're waiting on materials for the 3rd gym.
one wasn't damaged so badly that it can't be reused for classes or other stuff. Right. It will get repaired, but it'll be at a later date. We gotta
Because
schedule
it's
that one.
usable for now.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Do we know how much the repair of the floors was?
300,000 sticks out there.
Yeah.
It
About
was,
300,000.
that was a conservative ballpark estimate on the part of the ICRIM representative that was there that day, without really dialing.
That
in
was
numbers.
refinishing the floor and replacing the bad stuff on the main gym, and then replacing the upper west side. And then this next spring, we'll go in and resand down the east side and totally redo that one. Not replacing wood, the west side needs replaced. They're gonna replace all the wood there. I couldn't decide that's what needed to be done there.
And that's happening in the spring?
The
West
west
side.
side's it's gonna start here probably next week or two,
Oh, okay. So they'll be down 1 gym.
down to 2. They'll have the east side and the main floor.
So what are you thinking your proposal is on how
So,
to move forward?
Well, right now, our recommendation is that we don't take any action against them. We don't terminate the contract. That is, if you wanted to say, Peter, bring that back to us, something I could do for you guys. But that is not what we'll recommend. So that we want to give you an update, give you all the gory details, especially if you get asked by community members, what's going on, and then.
And you'll have another update on our regular November
Yeah.
our meeting. We wanted you to understand so that it didn't catch you by surprise.
We'll give you another update, but that's, if you wanted to take action, that would be the spot to do it. That would be the next meeting.
Do you think this company is going to be able to finish and follow through?
I'm looking at these two. These two have done.
With the deadlines we've set and they've never met, it's kind of iffy, but I think it's best that we stick with them and go through with this. If we choose not to and we tried to hire somebody else, it would be time, and then there would be a cost associated with that. If they could even get the 80 mil membrane TPO that they'd be putting around the units, Signature has it on hand. If we want to do a roof for next summer, we can't get it till, if we order now till August. That's how far out stuff is.
Are they actively working with you? Are they showing up on site? Are they
They
responsive to
have,
your calls?
yeah, they started today
So
on the worst of the units, and then they'll work to the other. There's 6 of them up there total that need to be, the ductwork needs to be covered.
it's taken a lot of work on these 2 gentlemen to stay on top of them, but I believe if they focus on it, then we will get it.
And I'm just trying to gauge, right? You guys you're in the trenches with them. And so if you're coming to me saying, hey, do you guys want to terminate? I'm going, "Well," and we don't want to, but I mean, sometimes until you really kind of get down to that nitty gritty of, do you even have a confidence level that they're gonna get it done and that they're gonna get it done right, and then we aren't gonna have to hire someone later and redo it anyway? And those are just questions.
We can now count on at least 2 hands or less than 2 hands at Sky, in the case of Skyview, the items that are outstanding for them.
It's not a lot.
So you've been after them, but you're feeling better about your situation and to get it. So maybe by the November meeting, if we could just get an update from legal on the insurance claim and their recommendations on how much we've paid out, ourselves and into damages and where that's at, withholding payment, and kind of maybe that line item of financial liability where we are, what we've already paid out. And their course of action of thought, that would be helpful, because we hate to even close the contract, have them finish, because the minute they do completely finish everything, it's even incumbent upon us to say, okay, you're done, and we have to pay you. Oh, but wait, we have actually incurred more expenses, so it would be nice to understand if we should withhold some of those monies, or we have a good assurance that we'll get that out of either a bond, the bonding company, or the insurance company.
We will bring that.
Thank you. It's complicated, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I had to go through that.
Okay, so now Nampa High, unless we're doing that. So they're in much better shape there. It's just been a long project. Some of it is the last air makeup unit arrived this week or last week.
Last
Last week. So that was the final big component for the HVAC system upgrade that was there. So that kind of finished that piece up. And then they're down to the punch list on items there, correct?
Yep,
With a couple exceptions.
Yep, I've been through and reviewed the list of items that they still had to fix or polish up. And again, they've gone through most of them. There are a couple of items that are outstanding, and there's like waiting. We have to wait on them due to delivery times. Some of them called for the replacement of the roof drains, strainers, basically swapping out the plastic for cast iron. There's a cover for the refrigerant line for the condensing unit that was just placed, that it needs to be powder coated in order to make it weather resistant and not corrode and all of that. So that lead time is a little bit out, because the powder coating place is just had COVID go through their shop. So that put that back a few weeks.
And then there's one item on the specs that we're going to work on making sure they follow through on. That's going to take them a while to do.
Yep.
But again, we feel like we're in the same position as Skyview, is that we just need to keep drumming them along, beating the drum for them, and we're going to get them to finish. It just won't be August 11th. It'll be more December 11th or something like that. That we think would be maybe a little longer at Nampa High with some of the sloped over the venting or the ducting they have to do.
Yeah, which we need to do additional coordination, because this was a relatively recent item when we were going through and verifying that they completed everything. So
Herding cats. You've been herding cats.
it is a little bit like herding cats. There are 2 different contractors on this on the Nampa High project. They work under the one roofer, but the HVAC related scope goes to the HVAC contractor.
And pardon me if I can ask you again, are these contractors completely different than the ones at Skyview, totally different company, or?
The same company got both bids. So the same company acting as general at both bids.
Right. and then
They brought in different
sub-
mechanical contractors
okay.
underneath them as a subcontractor.
Okay, and with the Nampa High delays, a lot of that was just kind of like the supply chain, if I remember right, not necessarily weather related or.
There's some of that. There's some planning items that should have gone a lot better and been worked out prior to late equipment showing up, things like that.
Yeah.
So it could have gone much more smoothly than it did.
Does it ever really go as smoothly as you want? In
Never.
my experience with projects, it's like.
There's a million moving parts on these kind of
Right,
things, so
right.
it's.
This has been the worst.
I think the summary is,
4 years I've been here, this has been the worst.
you're still gonna see people up on the roofs for a while longer. That's kind of the key summary here. So if you do hear from community members, I'm glad to answer their questions. If you don't want to, I'm glad to do that for you.
What the work that they're doing should not in any way impact what's going on inside the school.
Thanks for your
Yeah.
diligence.
Thank you, guys. Thank you. Yeah,
Thank you.
thanks for your hard work.
And then I'm wondering if we might tackle the Idaho Central Credit Unions, and then you can decide how much work you want to do on policy after
That sounds good.
that. Peter?
Steve, you want to do this one? You want me to?
We can take.
Okay. Okay. Go, Steve.
Yeah. Fair enough. So one thing that I've learned a lot through this process is that things are never quite as simple as they might appear that they should be. So just a little bit of history around this. We have a wonderful working relationship with CapEd. CapEd has done a lot for our community. Their Give 100, Give 100. CapEd's been really responsive. If there was a need and one of our ADs reached out to CapEd, Todd Christensen would just say, send me an invoice, I'll pay for it. Just really, really good long-term relationship. I had a very long conversation with Todd today following up on what had happened. So initially the ADs and I had met with Todd over in Meridian, and basically what they proposed was adding video boards in each of our high schools. Video boards are fairly expensive, and it would be probably a couple $100,000 to do that. Seemed like a really nice offer. Seemed like, oh gosh, this is something we ought to do. We scheduled a time to meet with maintenance. Peter and I did. We had Daktronics come out and kind of have a conversation. We looked into it a little bit, like what it would cost to do not only in the gym, but then outside, adding it to our stadiums. Interestingly enough, about that time, ICCU kind of stepped in and said, hey, we're ready to give you something substantial. And this agreement kind of represents a substantial contribution in terms of equipment to support video boards, both indoor and outdoor at all three of our comprehensive high schools. The terms that ICCU set forth were actually also pretty agreeable in comparison to some of the terms that CapEd had discussed. Specifically, the length of the contract. CapEd initially started with a 25-year commitment. It's a long time for anything. Also, CapEd wanted exclusive naming rights as a financial institution. ICCU's contract talks about the use of their video boards to even advertise other, at least electronically, that we could electronically advertise other financial institutions. So the dollar amount really associated with this ICCU offer is probably going to approach $1 million. It's a significant contribution. CapEd probably is not in a position to offer that kind of level of support. They would be happy to be involved at a much smaller number. To use an analogy, you take the new girl, or do you leave the old girl, waiting at the steps for the, she's all dressed up, ready to go to the dance. And it's a really hard one. Once again, long-term relationship with CapEd that's been really positive, and CapEd's done a lot for us. There are some agreements in place currently with CapEd, in particular at Columbia, that has kind of a long-term relationship, but what ICCU is offering is incredible. The other extension to this is we had a conversation a little while ago around graduation requirements, and we talked specifically about 3 technology credits. One of the things that is going to empower the use of these video boards is the potential in creating a course to go along with the use of the video boards. So we would pull students into doing that. And currently, Cindy Arnson, our CTE coordinator, is working on creating a path that would tie into a course of study at CWI and DSU. So we would create basically a digital marketing video. There's more specific. Cool. All that technology that I wouldn't know how to use, Peter could probably figure it out, but so that we can actually leverage those boards. And then the beauty of those boards too is that there's a curriculum that comes from Daktronics, who would be the supplier, on how to use them. And ICCU and CapEd both are really interested in helping us to use those video boards as a tool to generate revenue for digital advertising. The other thing that both credit unions are interested in is it's another great way to involve students who aren't athletes in those events. So similar to our parents for band who come, to football games or halftime shows, but really highlighting those students that learn how to use those video boards. And then there's uses for the video boards as well outside of just those competitions. So, and then Peter, you can correct me at any point. One of the things that's tricky is the donation. What ICCU is proposing is that they would provide a donation to us. There's a leverage in that it allows us to not have to put it out in RFP. You would be accepting a donation. Some people might claim that that's a way of skirting that process instead of just making it more straightforward and having the money come to the school and then us putting out a request for a proposal.
So the credit union would buy the equipment and donate the equipment instead of donating funds.
And how's that skirting the issue?
I don't know, skirting the issue or leveraging it to the benefit, that allows them to say, we want Daktronics. If we had to go out and bid it, there's probably not a set contract for that thing. We'd have to put it out there, and any video board manufacturer could come in here and try and win that bid.
And we really do want Daktronics because that's what our scoreboards are, and it would be a mess to have lots of different ones. I only bring that up because it you can only take one girl to the games, and it's going to be kind of tricky to navigate this.
What happens at the end of 15 years?
Well, so we had that conversation because the video boards actually have according to Daktronics, solid 10 years, and then beyond that, they should go for 15 years, but solid to 10 years. And so to that point, the language within this contract that ICCU has kind of provided is that they're like, look, our name's all over it. We're not gonna walk away. We don't want stuff with our name on it not working. But they do ask in this contract for first right of refusal on continuing the contract.
If I may ask a question, Steve, help us understand why we wouldn't. I mean, I get the relationship, I understand, I mean, I think that, but what are the downsides to accepting this contract? What are the negatives?
With ICC?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think I think one potential drawback is it looks like we're favoring the mega business. I mean, ICCU's new building right off the interstate, and I mean, they're flashy, right? All the ICCU cars, and CapEd's more homegrown. CapEd's been with us for years and years and years. But it's $1 million. It's $1 million. Nearly. And one other thing, one other caveat, I guess, ICCU, when we met with Clark, Peter and I met with Clark and the ADs, and it was just, Clark's like, are you sure that's big enough? No, I want a bigger one. You need to put in a bigger video board there. It needs to be bigger. And when we were talking with CapEd, it's kind of like, well, we'll pay for it, but no, we'll have to figure out how we're going to get fiber in. And Clark's like, no, installation's on us. We're paying for everything. So, all right, Peter, but
Yeah.
your turn.
That's a good summary, Steve. I would say that the hard part is, his analogy about picking which girl to take to the dance is a very apt one for this one, because it does feel like you're going to be the bad guy for somebody. The question is who, and that's the only thing that we're struggling with. And how do we have not yet found what could be a win-win for both organizations, at least as of the way it's presented. So I think that technology to install, we've looked at that. We're not too worried about that aspect or those pieces there.
So if we decide to not use this contract with ICCU, is the table on the offer on the table still from CapEd?
Yeah.
So CapEd would be willing to do something. It would probably be the equivalent of doing something in our gyms, a little smaller in each of the.
And if I understand this contract correctly, they would still allow CapEd to actually come in and advertise, just not name on the board, right? But okay, not static. So it could be through digital or whatever. So it's not like we're completely cutting all ties with CapEd. We would still allow them to have some, if they will be interested still.
And to speak to that too more directly, initially when CapEd had talked to us about it, they wanted exclusive, no other financial institutions. And ICC is like, we don't care. Yeah, we just, our name's up on the board and that's most important.
So this would be an item that we would then vote on at the meeting.
And Peter, will you just review the policy, because this is
Oh,
a donation,
yeah.
the size of the donation does need to go through the board.
Yes, yes,
Can I give one other piece of history?
yes, yeah.
It is, when we met with CapEd, and by the way, we love CapEd, we just do love CapEd, but when we met with them, they're like, so just so you know, we were really working with West Data, and West Data, ICCU swept in and just kicked us out the door. And they're like, we didn't even have another opportunity. And so today I kind of had that conversation, and he had said, well, what if we could come up with that $300,000 per site? Like, I'm sure we probably prefer to go with CapEd because we have that history. He didn't offer that. He said 150 to 200,000 is kind of fair.
Per site. Is that
No,
or total?
No, that was just so.
Yeah.
In
So the-
second place, is there any consideration to middle schools? They still have games, they're smaller, they could take smaller boards. This contract is clearly for high school. Just a thought, maybe we would be excited to have them in our middle schools.
I think they would be less excited.
Well, I think they would. It's the consolation prize, there's no doubt.
Yeah, and I really think I think CapEd will continue to work with us.
I think they'd still be represented with us. We'd still be honored to have their name in our schools. I don't know, I'm reaching.
Well, and that was,
Go
yeah,
ahead.
you should share with me.
All right, sorry, I gotta say something. So, both Dallas and I are on the board for CapEd, guys. So I did call both of these to let me know what was going on. I kind of knew what was going on anyway. I did talk to both Todd's CEO and Todd Christensen, and let them know what was going on. And they totally understood. They knew it's the difference between a $7 billion credit union and a $1 billion credit union. My first question for Peter and Steve was, are they expecting us to change our business relationship, our work relationship with them? Because we have all of our ASP accounts with CapEd. That was not even anything on the question. So we are not looking to move from CapEd. We've got millions of dollars with them. They love us. We love them. They have a great relationship. I love dealing with them. Always say I'm on the board as well. I took off my board hat and I told them straight up as a CFO of this, I cannot say we're going to give away $1 million. That doesn't make sense to me. And they understood. So it was not an adversarial whatsoever. And I was bummed I will say as a board member that we lost out. And as soon as other board members who have already been talking about it find out they lost out, then we dig in to Adam Central, they will be upset. But I mean, literally they throw their money around very much because they know they have it. I was auditing a credit union down in Idaho State, because Idaho State University Credit Union. CapEd came in and ICCU came in and basically got all the naming rights for everything against ISU Credit Union. Like, for your state credit union, we're in your spot. It's kind of is with money. So unfortunately, but like I said, I did talk to the main people there, and there was no hard feelings whatsoever, as Steven said. It is what it is. They know what happens, but they were very eager to continue to do stuff with sponsorships, batting facilities. I think they're looking at doing a batting facility for Skyview.
There's kind of a verbal agreement with Skyview. They've already, they contributed $25,000 to Columbia for a 25-year deal. Columbia, so there's already a long-term kind of deal there, but.
That's back to CapEd.
Yeah. CapEd,
For the batting, they're getting.
Yeah.
But there's also some naming that goes with that, even at their football stuff. But once again, ICCU is just saying.
Yeah.
And would CapEd be okay with coming with, would they still be interested in keeping what they already have in place?
Yeah, no, I think that they don't want to give anything. We just have to make sure that the contract, particularly at Columbia, doesn't. There's a few little things we might have to work through specifically at Columbia. The other two schools should.
So the intent of tonight was to make sure that you were familiar with the contract, that you understood the history, and then we'll anticipate some type of action in the regular work meeting probably.
So Steve, you're telling us to go with the new girl.
Sounds like he's torn.
That is the answer.
Yeah, you're trying to tug at our heartstrings, but here's the deal. It's about saying, you know what, this person worked really hard. So, but you know what, this teacher's getting really old and wants to retire, but we've worked with her this long, so we're gonna keep sending our kids here. Or we could get 10 teachers to teach our kids, and they're gonna have more one-on-one time. I mean, to me, that's the difference, right? Like, yes, this to me provides huge CTE opportunities for kids in our buildings, in addition to just a great gift, right? A cool experience, cool gift. Like, to me, I'm thinking educationally, there's not a choice here to me. And I'm not saying that we don't want to work with CapEd. Same thing. I love CapEd, but we can be the bad guys. Or I have no problem being the bad guy and making a decision. I mean, I just think, I get it. You talk to these people on a daily basis and you work with them. That was my only concern after hearing the Columbia deal. Like, is this contract gonna impact, like, is this affecting the existing contract? Has legal looked at those two contracts to make sure that they don't?
We're gonna have to look at that just a little bit closer. I just got that actually today. So we can look at that one more closely, but as far as the other two schools,
policy, line 42 is the key one here, because this is a conditional.
Yeah.
So,
And it's conditional because of length of time?
well, the naming rights and all of those things that come along with it. That's more if they just give it walked away, then that would be an unconditional gift. But they want naming rights in a period of time and first right of refusal. Those are all conditions on the gift.
And you have to advertise, do some advertising for them at particular home games and things, I think is what I saw in the contract. That's more of those conditions.
Sure. The only thing I'm not seeing in here is the maintenance conversation.
As far as maintaining the.
Yeah, I don't know how much it costs, whose that's on, who puts that bill.
So I kind of spoke to that just a little bit in that, Daktronics is like, oh no, 10 years, we'll be super good for 10 years. And what Clark had shared from ICCU is he's like, we're not gonna have our name on junk. He's like, I can guarantee you that. But he said the other piece of this is you are generating revenue and hopefully a lot of revenue. And so that may be a consideration is what we do with the revenue that we're generating.
Maybe I'm just thinking in the language of the agreement, it would be good to address that in the agreement somewhere. The maintenance part, and I mean, I totally understand all those things, but then an idea of, because it talks about installation and cost. Okay, well then what happened? I mean, again, if something does go
Just
wrong,
clarifying,
let's
right?
just throw it in there so we all know.
One thing too about these boards is, how big do they say the sections will be? 16?
They're like 16-inch little squares. So that you can replace one little square and then get it back up. So it's not like you have to replace the entire thing if something fails.
Yeah, and it seems fair if we're creating revenue that we do that, or if we know the price, it's just, I think, something to take into consideration, not that you want to keep
So
pushing for more.
just one other piece that the board may consider, and Peter can take this back. Peter or I could, if we're not comfortable at 15 years, I'm not convinced that we could push them to like a 12-year or, I mean, this is what they're proposing is a 15. So
Even though the life is 10, right?
that's, I mean, they said a solid 10 and it should. So anyways, if you have concerns about that, then we can push back and just say, hey, our board's feeling pretty good, but they would feel even better.
Well, I think though, it doesn't, I mean, it kind of takes care of that though, because it says so long as the Daktronics video board remains fully operational. So I feel like at 10 years, if it's no longer operational and no longer covered under the warranty, well, then this contract is terminated. Am I reading that wrong right there at A?
Yeah.
Yeah,
That is what
So-
they're trying to get at.
Reasonably repaired.
I agree with you on the length of the contract and what that means, but it still never specifies who's keeping it operational, like whose cost. That's
So in item 6A, it says revenue generation, schools shall use the video boards to generate revenue for the athletic department. And maybe that's broad enough that we could also throw revenue into a maintenance.
well, the first step is just to ask them if
Yeah.
there's maintenance included, they might just say yes and put it in and we're good to rock and roll. If they say no, then we know and we can at least take that into consideration and what that understanding is.
And they are happy to come to that board meeting to.
I agree. I think that's something from prior to that we're not trying to add stuff into the agreement and
Yeah.
that.
I agree that asking if they are willing to put it in there. I don't think if the outcome is they say no, like we'll cross that bridge when we get there kind of a thing, which may mean we have to maintain it, right? Well, then I think that doesn't go in this contract. We don't have to contract with ICCU about how we're gonna maintain it. We won't have to tie our hands.
No, we just need to know. It's just something to take.
It's- yeah.
Consideration.
Yeah,
Sounds like these gentlemen are going to go back and negotiate something around maintenance and perhaps maybe shortening the contract.
Especially if there's not gonna be maintenance, I think the term
Yeah.
would be a good lever pull.
Yeah.
And legal has been with us walking through the contract all the way through the process. We're not finalized.
Perfect.
Good, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, guys. Yeah.
All right. So I don't know how much energy you have left. So what I thought we would do first of all is to confirm, and this information is up here. If we could start with the current policies with no recommended changes. So there were several policies where 5 out of 5 of you or said these were okay. There were a couple of them, for example, I think it was Trustee Westfall, where you said, hey, let's link policy 7250, assuming that we would link 7250. That policy is up in the no changes, because that's a relatively simple, not a more grammatical change. But if I misunderstood that, I'm happy to put that back down. We're happy to put that back down and to consider some additional edits. There were questions on 7401 about the conflict of interest. Policy 1610 covers trustees, is very specific. So most of the questions that I saw written in there were related to that. So that one is up in no changes unless you wanted to talk about more things. And then I wasn't sure on 7405, but apparently we didn't have the right link in there. So, okay.
Was that the one that just linked to the wrong number? Yeah.
I redid it 3 times this afternoon and I couldn't get it.
Yeah, if you scrolled down, you could go to the policies and click the right one, but yeah, it
policy's
was.
correct on the website.
Yeah, yeah.
I don't know why.
Our link was being weird,
And so
yeah.
other than that, there were just X's. So I didn't know what that meant. So if it's something that we need to look at and consider editing, we'll put it back down on the section. So there's what, 11 or 12 policies that we would just mark as review. And then we have some work to do on some other policies. So questions on that first section, first of all.
I just heard you say 7250, but I didn't see 7250 in there.
It was 7237
Oh.
to 7250.
Thank you.
Apologies, yes.
Thank you. I was like, I'm not making the tie.
So just to make sure I understand, if I may, what I'm seeing here, the first 3 pages are have broken them up based on categories. And then after that, it's just listing all of them in order and how many of us want.
Right, so we're now on the summary page and we've just tried to break them up into chunks on the summary.
Okay.
With the first section saying that nobody demonstrated or put an E in there or suggested edits, or they were simple edits, removing a reference to No Child Left Behind or something like that. And so those top sections there, we would, our very short practice has been to put them on the consent agenda as review. And so,
Yeah.
That's good.
and then in the next section, there were several, really appreciate your thoughtful deep reading in these that had edits. Some of them were questions, some of them were please add policies. I tried to note just in really shorthand or copy them over the comments that were related to that. So either tonight or sometime in the future, we'd love to hear you discuss them so that we understand what your edits would be, so that we could come up with a first read with those. And then you can see at the bottom that there were several policies that this board would like us to consider adding. And actually anything but one of them, at least 2 of you suggested that we add, and so they all would be qualified for us looking at running through, making sure that doesn't conflict with practices or that we need to realign practices in order to do that.
What's the right procedure for that? Does it go to our policy committee? Or does it go just up for a first read after it?
We haven't done the policy committee with this process.
Yeah, with this process.
Okay, so it just goes, because
Yeah.
we're doing it as a committee as a whole.
Yeah,
So as long as it was checked off, then it could just go to first read.
and we had said, right, 2 or more.
2 or more. And what again, our practice in the last 2 months has been is administration has looked at it, trying to look at whether or not this is a repeat of law. If there are conflicts or something that makes it different for NAMPA, those type of things. And so there are cases where we've offered suggestions or taking out some things that really are procedural and not just policy. And so then we would bring them to you for first read and listen to you talk about what you'd like to see changed.
Can I ask a random question of Randy? Gap principles versus the,
I guess.
yeah, just 2 different accounting procedures, both required.
Yeah, I guess it's the actual standards.
Okay.
Sitting by, I mean, that's the standards. GASB is the Government Accounting Standards Board. So they do the standards, government auditing, accounting standards.
So that is our standard. I just saw both of
So,
them use
yeah,
2
so
different
there's a
policies.
reference there, and in reality, it's the same thing. So GAP is generally accepted accounting principles. That's the overarching for everything. GASB is the organization, governmental accounting standards board that creates the policies and those. GAGAS is the principles associated with all the stuff that they do. So it's
Okay.
all,
That
there's
actually
really
helps.
not much. And then I can go through if you want. I have responses to every one of these to have, if you guys want. I can do that now. I can do that later. It's up to you guys, how you guys want to attack that.
When BSG reviewed them, did you see, it would have been, it's always hard, where do you put the feedback from the administration? As you were going through, did you see stuff a lot that we needed to just update because it's been a while since we looked at these?
There's a lot of these were almost the exact same. Like we've taken what ISBA is and we've made it our own. Some of these are a hodgepodge of things that like federal laws change, like there's some with that we needed to do there's one in there that we needed to have in there because we needed to basically say, hey, we can use our federal funds to pay all these things for different ways. There's some we had to do because of IDEA Part B funds, hey, these are required for these. So ISBA created a policy and put it here. The one I did notice, which was kind of hodgepodge, was the conflict of interest. You mentioned it in the board one, but it's like in 4 different places. Even in ISBA, it's in 4 different places. We had to create one last year for federal compliance, so we have it in just one spot. But it looked like they put it in 3 or 4 different places in purchasing and here and there. So those are the things I just don't understand why ISBA did that. So, and then there's other ones throughout the years of accounting. So what happens in the accounting world when the new standard comes out, one of the first things I always tell the organizations, I did it when I was an auditor as well, is like, hey, this says they're required to have a policy. So the first one, GASB 34. GASB 34 came out prior to me getting into accounting 20 years ago. And all it really is, literally is a financial statement preparation to make government-wide financial statements to look more like business. It's a practice on finance, has nothing to do with their day-to-day whatsoever. But we had to have a policy for it, so it's in there. But the funny thing is there's other policies like the GASB 40 investments and that, which aren't in other areas. I'm like, so that one's required, GASB 54, which is fund balance. They have in some areas and some other, so they're really inconsistent with how they apply which policies are there. You can tell it was done by a lawyer, not necessarily by an accountant that understood some of them. So I just like, in my opinion, it's like, it's up to you. It's not bad how they want to do it. So if we want to conform more to ISBA, it's probably not a bad thing. I just want to, there's some things in certain ones, I'm like, this one doesn't really apply. We need to kick it out because we don't do Indian gaming, or we don't do or we don't get any of those funds. So those type of things are things that we need to just make sure we watch out for, to just not have policies just because ISBA has policy.
And before we bring these back, Mr. Dewey will go through and offer some of those words. Say, hey, we know that you kind of wanted this, these might be reasons why we would ask you to consider not doing it, or these are reasons why it would be a really good idea to consider that. And so that would be the next step before you see them in November. And besides the consent agenda, you know, there may be, I don't know, maybe we'll get 7 or 8 of them done. I don't know how much time we'll have to get them done for your review, but we'll keep chunking them off.
And I want to be clear, you know, should someone come to review our comments, I had some in there about the executive and travel and approval that are reflective of a time when Randy and I worked together and not of the current administration of how are these approved, what's the process. So I just wanted to be clear about. You know,
Yeah, and I actually have a response on some of these as well, if you want to, on some of these. And it's really the hierarchy of approval. I've actually gone through this with different, as Lieutenant Keller just the other day of, hey, who's supposed to print, you know, to, hey, sign off on my mileage request. In the past, we've always had the deputy superintendent or assistant superintendent do it. Well, she is ahead of it. It'd be like me signing off. I mean, so really, you always want to go up. Never really want to go down. So we made a policy when David Pearson was here that, and for many different reasons, that we had Brian approve his, you know, expense reports, his mileage reimbursements. And it really wasn't anything formal other than, hey, we're meeting this week, hey, you approve this. It wasn't like they took it to the board and had it like a big, it was just more of, hey, we look at these to have somebody above do that. And it was only for the superintendent. So we didn't ever have that in policy. We had that more in procedure, and it was more of accounting good practices that we were doing that, nothing more.
And I just wanted to be clear, that's where my comments were coming
Yep,
from.
I knew exactly where it was coming from. Yep.
Yeah, just good practice of things.
It's checks and balances. That's really all it is. And so yeah, we're fine. And some of these things here, like bond account, now some of these we actually created as a result of the issues we had prior to me arriving. And so, but I did notice that later on, ISBA actually had a policy that they created that had almost the same language that we did, a little bit more descriptive, some different dates. So it's like, well, do we want to go to their dates or not? We don't have a problem meeting our dates, but it was really more of, it's up to you and what you want to do. So and it's in a different section than we have it.
So we'll work to incorporate those comments, and then the board will have in the first read the opportunity to say, hey, I wasn't able to write that, or that's not exactly what I meant, and you'll be able to do that. So that's what our plan is.
I have one question for everyone, if I could. Policy 7408 is one matched up with what Trustee Rost asked before, which we were looking at for making our, what was our 8,005, our 9,005. Would you prefer we put it as a 9,005 and not do that one, or keep it here in the, where do we want to have that one kind of land? And that's where we'll try and navigate this.
So 7408 got super specific into dollar amounts, those that were bonded, those that weren't, right? It was almost a different subject matter than the one we talked about last month, which was more about the practice of hiring and time frames. So I think these were more financial, and the other one was more the process of how it's being done. There was a little bit of crossover. I think they could cross-reference each other. I think for me, I wasn't sure that this one was even as necessary.
Okay.
Because the other one said, well, if it's, and it had the same amounts. The other one said, well, if it's 50,000, and it was pretty descriptive, at least that was the one I was referring to. I like that. And I'm thinking, well, if it's 50,000, then there's all, you already have to go through all the financial words. You don't have to go to this policy to know specifically how they detailed out what should happen. Same with, you know, like when you did the federal, when you're like, hey, we want to use ESSER funds, which means we have to go to federal, which automatically check marks, they have to be bonded. So that wasn't a dollar amount that they had to be bonded, it was more about the type of contract you were putting out, and then if it is, then that points you to another different policy, which is just law of what you have to do. So I wasn't thinking 7408 was, I thought there was a couple good things you could pull for reference, but I think I would rather defer to the one we talked about last month than the opposite. But I'm one person.
And you'll find on some of the procurement things, really all it is a regurgitation of state law.
Yeah.
When we used to do, this is my third or fourth time going through these, the very first time I went through with Buddy, our previous lawyer, he's the previous counsel, he had recommended not to regurgitate state law in the code. So, I mean, because when it changes, like it did with us, then you have to go through the process of changing the policy. The one nice thing I do like about having some of these procurement things in there, because it's easy to find, and people can easily find it in our policy, so they don't have to go try to find and decipher what's a state policy. So that's where it's kind of nice, and I think that's why I'm guessing why ISTA put it in such detail, because those are areas where you get yourself in trouble quite a bit. But if you notice, there was a lot of different things about purchasing and rules around that.
Yeah.
Every single one of them was literally just a grab from state code and put it in there. So even the travel policy was similar to that. So we follow state code. Okay, so we could have a one-liner policy that says follow state code, or we could regurgitate the state code. So it's totally up to you guys.
I almost like the
Yeah, but
one-liner and
if a
just
bunch of those could be
what is
combined.
the state code? Yeah,
And then we would just reference the code.
yeah, then you just have it
I
referenced.
think our current ones somewhat do that. We have a little bit of.
Yeah.
of that, but we can come up with one that.
Yeah.
I think there was some good information in there, but I don't know that necessarily has to stand alone.
Yeah. Agreed. Well, so good
Does that help?
with where we're at and moving forward. Okay.
What does that mean? I'm lost in this process.
Have I done this? Have I done all of it?
Your lip sync is next. Thank you guys, and we'll adjourn.
Can I ask, was our request, can we take a photo that we're all here together? I'm like a memory keeper person. I want to make sure.
Yeah.
And there's no other